you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we're the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. 3 new Patreons to announce this week, Ben. Very exciting.
A trio.
Thank you for joining us on patreon.com/TQM pod. Our new Patreons are Kate, who has also been a really big follower and contributor on social media as well with us, so welcome. We've got Mistress Ruthie, which is an interesting name.
We better do what she says.
We're going to do what you say. Good to have you. And Zach has joined us as well. So thank you so much. If any of you are thinking about joining us, come on in. We've got, we release the podcast episodes early, ad-free. We do our extra scoop, which is, normally a little bit of a chat about what we're doing generally and, taking apart what we did on the episode, although we've got an interesting one this week, which we'll tell you about towards the end. But yes, really lovely community, lots of feedback, lots of chat going on. So come and join us at patreon.com/TQM pod.
TQM pod.
The other thing I need to say is we are now on Blue Sky Social. I know some people preferring Blue Sky to X, so come and join us there if you're a Blue Skyer. We are same name as we are on X, so it's at TQM Pod. Nice and easy.
It works pretty much the same as Twitter, doesn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it even
looks a bit.
In fact, I was posting on both, and there was one point where I was, which one am I on? I don't. Not that it mattered, but I'm like, which one am I on?
It's a friendlier environment, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a different vibe, I would say. Different vibe, but the same thing. So, we're on both. So either on X or Blue Sky. Well, I mean, maybe you're on both, like we are. So at TQM Pod.
Well done. That sounds brilliant.
I have no idea what we're going to do today. Not a single hint from you, Ben.
No, I kept it under my hat because I was investigating this. Funnily enough, I came across this when I was doing my day job, and it was such a good thing that I uncovered. I was using it. So in my day job, I quite often develop TV programs. This was for a TV program, which is why I didn't use it here, because I don't like the intersection between the two. It's not going to be used in a TV show anymore, for no fault of our own. If you know the world of television, 1 in about 7.4 trillion ideas ever make it there. So, but this is quite extraordinary. But it starts with, and I've covered this before, curses. And curses that we've talked about it before, how it's you can be interpreted in many different ways, whether it works sometimes because people internalize it and believe it. Yeah. But I've never come across a case, perhaps so much in Western society, as unusual as this one. Seattle, the USA, obviously, Thursday, April the 18th, 1991. And 35-year-old Christopher Case. It's a peculiar surname when I keep talking about this case.
Yeah,
the case of Christopher Case.
The case of Christopher Case, yeah.
A successful music industry executive is found sitting bolt upright in his own bath, his head cocked one side, and he's quite dead. There's no evidence of foul play, there's no money troubles, there's no bust-ups, there's no sign of a break-in. The police find no evidence of murder, yet this case will turn out to be far stranger than anyone involved could ever imagine.
What's the difference between being quite dead and totally dead?
He was quite dead. I don't know, I've done that in a Victorian way. He was quite
dead, the young gentleman.
So who was Chris Case? In his early 30s, after a stint as a radio DJ, Chris moved from Richmond, Virginia to settle in Seattle to start a new life. I wish I hadn't written settle in Seattle.
To start a new life. That's a real tongue twister.
According to his friends and colleagues, he was working as a producer of soft music for lifts. And that's true. He was...
Wow.
Back in the early 90s, it's almost impossible for people to consider this now, but companies used to buy specifically targeted music to play in their lifts. So that idea of lift music, it was a thing, and it had made him a lot of money.
I love that fact. It's like, do you go, no, I'm sorry, far too hard for our lift. You're not having that. The one I remember like that, when I was, I had a Saturday job once working in a jewellery store, and back then, I think it was to do with, rights payments. they had about an hour tape of instrumentals that they'd just play on a loop all day.
Wow.
And it was okay, you zoned it out. I zoned out every track on that list apart from Funky Town. And honestly, I hear it now, and it almost makes me feel physically sick, because it was just an instrumental. So all it went for about 5 minutes was da 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 da.
Oh no!
Da, 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 da. And every time it came on, which while I was at work was at least 6 times during the day, I just oh god.
There's those ones where it's an instrumental but not from the original artist.
Yeah.
There's a curry shop near where we live, a curry house, and they play music played on the panpipes.
Right.
And the last time I was in there was George Michael featured. So what's it called? Wham Rap, done on the panpipes, and so least controversial Enya, Sail Away on the panpipes, but also I only know the version by Beat Freaks. There's always someone watching me.
Oh yeah.
That one. But they were doing that
Rockwell,
on the pan.
I think.
That's it, Rockwell. Yes. And like to do that on the panpipes. Who listened to that track and went
panpipe?
That's got panpipe written all over it. That has.
A interesting fact. I think Rockwell, Somebody Watching Me, backing vocals by Michael Jackson.
Oh, that makes sense. Because it does sound very Michael Jackson. The whole song has that vibe to it.
Feel like that is Michael Jackson.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was thinking though, if you're doing those ones for the restaurant, if it were me, I'd just be a little bit naughty and go, I'm going to do a panpipe version of Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Now, look, honestly, I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah. This thing has got everything on there.
I have got a jazz version of Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is really good, actually.
Oh.
Which takes us back to Seattle.
So, well, I'm back there. Yeah, so the main point about Chris is that he is doing very well for himself. This is making him a lot of money. But he's a bit of a loner, easy to get along with, a nice guy, but he prefers his own company. He's passionate about music. He's very good at his job, as we've established, and he travels around the US on business. His friends say, though, that recently he'd become fascinated with ancient music, Indian, African, Egyptian. He was seeking out the oldest and most obscure recordings.
Wow.
He was also fanatical about his own fitness. He was always at the gym, and he was taking the latest vitamin supplements. That is important later on.
Okay.
He had just got back to Seattle from a business trip to San Francisco when he called his old friend Sammy Sauder. She was the first to notice that something was subtly different about him. She couldn't put her finger on it, but by the end of that week, Chris Case would be dead. The timeline is now April the 14th. Chris tells Sammy that he can hear voices whispering in his apartment and sees strange shadows on the walls. He tells her that he's checked everywhere. There are no speakers left on, no radios playing next door. He's done a thorough search. He's asked all his neighbours, and he can't work out what it is. And he's certainly not the superstitious type. They both agree that it is weird. The next day, April the 15th, Chris calls Sammy again. This time he is hysterical. He's had a terrifying experience. He said that he had been lifted out of bed by, and I quote, something very evil, and was violently shaken. All the while he couldn't move. He says he found blood under his fingernails and all over his sheets the next morning.
Wow.
Sammy begins to worry for him, especially when the next day Chris doesn't turn up for work and calls from his colleagues to his apartment go unanswered. Rodney Higuchi, he's the owner of a local occult bookstore, and he says that Chris came in early on the morning of April the 16th and was very hyper. He buys crucifixes, occult symbols, books on hauntings, and tons of candles. It was the sheer amount, all kinds of religions and superstitions that Rodney remembers.
I love the fact, I wonder if the guy who owns the occult store just went, if you're going to buy all that, you want to go for the vampire starter pack.
Yeah.
It works out cheaper.
Well, that evening, Sammy gets no answer from Chris's phone. She's really worried now and asks the police to make a welfare visit. They turn up late, knock on the door, get no reply. They ask a neighbour, but there is nothing to report. As Sammy would learn the next day, something had again terrified Chris, and this time it was sufficient for him to flee his apartment. Records from his credit card statement show that he booked into a local hotel for the night. April the 17th. Sammy gets a message from Chris on her answer phone. There is an eerie calm to his voice. The hysteria of the last few days is gone. He tells her that they almost got him the night before and that this would be his last day. He doesn't elaborate and he doesn't explain who they are or why this was going to be his last day. But he sounds resigned, exhausted. It's the last time Sammy ever hears from Chris. Rodney says Chris was again in early that morning with more requests for occult symbols. He claims he needs protection from something but wouldn't say what or whom. Rodney remembers that he had a very bad feeling about it all. April the 15th. It's 24 hours since Sammy last heard from Chris, and she's really worried now. She calls the police again and pleads with them to check back on Chris. This time they break into his apartment and find him sitting upright in his bath, resting against the wall, looking calm, but also dead. As the police begin to look around his apartment, they are shocked to see the sheer number of religious and occult paraphernalia all over the apartment. Salt had been poured across the door thresholds and around the inside of the walls, and every room of his apartment was full of burning candles, crucifixes, and other strange symbols. Books on ghosts and evil spirits are everywhere. The bizarre scene in the apartment makes them suspect foul play. But where's the evidence? The apartment door is locked on the inside. There are no signs of trauma to the body, no signs of violence or disturbance reported by the neighbours. Apart from the strange symbols and books, there is nothing obvious. When Sammy learns that Chris has died and the police explain there's no evidence of foul play, she doesn't believe them. Surely this is all an elaborate cover for a murder. Chris was certainly very worried that someone was out to get him. And after all the religious books, occult symbols and the like are new, he's never expressed interest in this stuff before. A day later, the coroner's report is still not in. The police call to say that they suspect a heart attack, which Sammy finds even harder to believe.
Well, the guy you said, he's like a regular gym goer. He's pretty fit. I mean, of course, all kinds of people can have heart attacks, but yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, Chris was young, fit. It doesn't add up.
Yeah.
So Sammy herself reaches out to an expert to ask if fit men can be struck by sudden heart attacks. They pointed her to the case of Boston Celtic football player and all-round athlete Reggie Lewis, who collapsed during the 1993 National Basketball Association playoffs and died soon after. Doctors misdiagnosed myocarditis.
Right.
And that was at that time when Chris died. It was a little known and uncommon disorder in which the heart muscle becomes inflamed and weakened. Infections are usually what causes this.
There's a couple of football players, soccer players who've had that, and they've collapsed on the pitch.
That's right.
Yeah.
But 3 days later, when the coroner finally delivers the report, it discounts this, pointing out that Chris did not have any flu-like symptoms or any other physical symptoms before his death. There is one outstanding possibility, though. The vitamin supplements.
Right.
Could he have been poisoned intentionally or by mistake? This is a staggering figure for me. 100,000 people die from accidental poisonings in the US every year.
Wow. Not just from vitamins, but...
No, from everything.
Right.
And a recent study, recent at the time, shows that well-known vitamins A, D and E, when taken in large amounts, can be dangerous and in rare cases lead to the paranormal, abnormal behaviour that we have seen in Chris.
Does that include hallucinations, I guess?
It can do, yeah. There's a case here cited. A 10-year-old Indian boy died after being given too much vitamin D in hospital. Yeah. And there's another case. There's a lady called Cheryl Lind. She seemed like the perfect grandma to her neighbours. She wasn't a grandma to her neighbours. Her neighbours thought she was the perfect grandma. Her devoted son was a regular visitor. And one day, everything changed. Threatening phone calls, letters, cutting her son out of all of her wills. Didn't speak to him. And then she went silent. When investigators broke into her house and found her dead on the kitchen floor, there was nothing suspicious apart from fat pamphlets claiming a Live Forever supplement and bottles of the stuff stacked in the kitchen. Right. A bottle was in fact open on the table. A few weeks later, the coroner concludes she died from an overdose of vitamin A. That had caused all of her paranoia.
Some bad selling there. Live Forever supplement. Yeah. It's like, whoa, okay, yeah.
But the coroner pointed out the large number of vitamins, the vitamins that Chris would have had to have taken would have to have been in huge quantities.
Right.
And there was no evidence of toxicity in the blood at all, according to the coroner's report. So after all this, we have to look at the implausible.
Well, one sec on the coroner's report. What did they conclude then? Just natural causes?
Well, we will come on
back
to
to that, okay.
Yeah. Chris had recently become obsessed with the occult. So what had caused this sudden descent into these terrifying nighttime visions and hysterical behaviour? To know this, we have to look back in time to that weekend in San Francisco. In an interview with his closest friend, Sammy, she says that in the last 6 months before he died, he had become interested in this ancient music. So much so that when an ancient music conference came up in San Francisco, he was on the first plane out of Seattle. A week before his death, on April the 11th, Chris is at this music conference. It's a gathering of academics, enthusiasts, hippies, all sorts of eclectic characters from all over the world.
I feel Sting would have been there.
Oh, he totally would have been, wouldn't he?
Wouldn't he? I was going to say with his balaclava, but that's not what... He plays that thing, doesn't he?
He plays his balaclava, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Chris is in his element, absorbed by the talk of ancient Egyptian music. Could he have picked up an interest in the occult here, a deep dive obsession that went too far too quickly? Sammy remembers Chris talking about someone he met there, an older woman. She says that Chris and the woman talked about Egyptian music. He enjoyed the exchange, he was fascinated. But as the weekend plays out, she begins imploring him to take to his room. This unnerved him, and he politely declined her advances until in the last day of the conference, when she becomes too strong and tells him firmly that he isn't interested. She's basically hitting on him very hard.
With her knowledge of Egyptian culture, she was kind of a mummy figure for him.
Oh my goodness, that's a good pun. I wish I'd thought of that. Well, she becomes angry and begins to threaten him. And this is where it gets weird.
This is where it gets weird.
She claims to be a witch and shouts that she will put a curse on him, one so powerful that he will be dead by the end of the week. Sammy says Chris told her he didn't believe in the supernatural, puts it down to an angry response of a jilted woman.
Right.
He returns to Seattle, and yet 6 days later, Chris was dead.
Wow.
So, is there any evidence that a curse can work? Well, let's just talk about one that's close to our chest, our hearts. 3,000 years after she was buried, the curse of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun apparently claimed its first victim. It was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself who told the US press that an evil elemental spirit created by priests to protect the mummy could have caused Lord Carnarvon's death.
Yeah.
Carnarvon was the man who played for the excavation and was the first to enter the tomb since it was sealed over 3 millennia ago. The discovery was a global press sensation, and stories quickly spread about the curse, and anyone who dared break into the pharaoh's tomb would be dead within a matter of days. Unfortunately, close investigation revealed something else. A small bite mark on Carnarvon's neck. Analysis revealed it to be a mosquito bite. A deadly kind of curse, but not a supernatural one.
Yeah. Although there were others, weren't there?
There were others.
But again, it could just be probability and, yeah, okay.
So, really, we're now left with the fact that Chris felt that he was under the curse of an older woman. That much is true.
Yeah.
The witch was real. He believed that he was being hunted and haunted as the week played out, and his conviction became ever more acute. Is it possible that Chris frightened himself to death?
Right.
And that's what we think really might have happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the coroner, he can't find anything wrong and basically records an open verdict. We all know the phrase, being scared to death.
Yeah.
In the UK, as late as the 1800s, there were several cases of people literally being frightened to death. One young boy returning from milking the cows was met by an apparition, a ghost that called out his name. The boy ran home, told his parents what he'd seen. That evening, he became increasingly despondent and feverish. By morning, he was dead. It was soon revealed that an older boy wearing a white sheet had done this to others in the village. Yeah, while the older boy never went to prison, the judges did apportion blame to the victim's tormentor. So that is a good example.
Early one of those kind of horrible TikTokers.
Yeah.
Or YouTubers, yeah. Prankers.
And then we've touched on this before, but I found this quote from a professor of pathology at the University of Adelaide, and he has written about. So in the Australian bush, there is this belief amongst natives that having a bone pointed at you puts a lethal curse upon you. And there are various cases of people who absolutely this happened to. He mentions a fine, robust tribesman in Central Australia who was injured in the fleshy part of his thigh by a spear that he believed had been enchanted. So this is another way of pointing a bone. The man slowly pined away and died without any surgical complication that could be detected. And Dr. Cleland cites a number of physicians who have referred to the fatal effects of this. And he says, like, basically poisoning is completely ruled out. There are a few poisonous plants that are famous there, but it doesn't sort of work in the native Australian culture to poison people like that. It's almost like a voodoo death, and this belief is held so firmly that basically people begin to refuse food and drink. They withdraw away from the rest of the village, and they literally pine away. So it is possible to die of fright.
So effectively, the process is you're so frightened, your mental capacity or paranoia or anxiety or panic lifts up. That has a physical effect on your body, let alone not eating or drinking or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the trajectory. Is it? It's you've been frightened by something, you become obsessed with it, your mental health suffers, which then impacts your physical health, and you die.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so there is this thought with Christopher that he was, because I mentioned he was a loner, and this is playing on his mind, and he gets into his head that there seems to be an association between his obsession with the music, meeting the witch, and him sort of travelling back and ruminating on this by himself. Yeah. And the more he reads about it, the more he suspects it could be true. And so he begins to terrify himself. Why he ended up in the bath, we don't know. Right. But it sort of points to a self-fulfilling prophecy of fear causing him to kill himself. So, but when I say kill himself, he is choosing to sort of shut himself down. Yeah. It's incredibly sad because, as I say, the coroner could not find a reason for it. This is the only valid explanation apart from the paranormal.
But I also wonder in that context of, I mean, you mentioned Tutankhamun and the various other Egyptian curses. It's almost a cliche now, isn't it? The Egyptian curse. I wonder if that creates almost a kind of mass hysteria of its own. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can see him going, oh, I've got some Peruvian panpipes here and I've got this Egyptian music, or Egyptian curses, Tutankhamun, ceremonies for the dead, and all the belief system that actually it creates its own kind of low-level paranoia. Ancient Egypt just creates that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And the pyramids and UFOs and everything around it, yeah.
Well, there's definitely, like, when you look at, people who work on real-life true crime cases, they get counselling to withdraw themselves away from what they've seen. He is going further into his own real-life true crime case and obviously not withdrawing. Yeah. And this appears to be the cause of it. But it has this sort of incredibly, I was going to say alluring, that's the wrong word, but there is something paranormal about what had happened. Even if the paranormal is just the words that he is taking on board, it is still possible, and there are people who believe that she really did put a curse on him, and he was being visited in the night by evil entities. I mean, what went through my mind was night terrors. Yeah. And I wonder whether an alternative explanation is that he had started taking some kind of sleeping pill or some kind of supplement which was causing night terrors, and he was putting the two and two together.
Or even some kind of mild allergic reaction which can make you a bit hallucinatory.
Yeah, I mean, I will say
Not
that
that
there was
that's
no
the word.
toxicity in the blood, but that wouldn't bring out an allergic reaction. You're right; that would have gone unknown.
I remember, I'm not saying it's relative, but I remember there was one type of antibiotics that I had a severe allergic reaction to. Well, severe-ish. But I remember it wasn't physical first. It was like a mental thing. I remember I was watching a really basic type show on Netflix, and I've been watching it for about 3 seasons, and we're in the 4th season, and I'm watching it going, I don't know who that person is, but I know they're one of the main characters. And what do they do again? And this storyline makes absolutely no sense. And then I realised, like, no, this is just me. I can't follow this. But it was at that point, it was like, yeah, something's wrong here. And then I realised it must be connected with the antibiotics I was taking. Stopped taking them and I came back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was, I mean, it's nothing like this, but I remember going, am I going a little bit mad here? Because I know that's the main character. I don't remember their name and I don't remember what they do. And I've been watching this now for 3/4 of an hour and I have no idea what's going on. Yeah, really weird.
Well, it is completely possible. I mean, I've had some bad reactions to some pills, and I mean, they've caused nothing quite like this, but it's impossible to explain to people who haven't had it how they can make you think differently for a bit.
Yeah, and not
make you worry about
realise you are
yourself.
doing it, you know.
You don't realise you're doing it. No, that's true.
What strikes me with this story and some of the other ones is if it's not anything like that, if it's nothing to do with the supplements, if it purely is paranoia and, you know, literally scaring yourself to death, how quickly that decline was for him. I mean, we don't know what his mental health was like before that incident, but 1 week, that's incredibly scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's so sad for everyone around him who tried to help. And that woman, Sammy, I've sort of highlighted the main parts of her involvement in the story, but she was so worried about him. She was trying to get him to come and stay with her. Right. And she was saying that she should come and stay with him, but he resisted. There was something stopping him.
She sounds like a great friend. I mean, to convince the police to go back, I'm sure they'd, you know, that would have taken some convincing, but amazing.
And she at the beginning of her investigation, as I sort of pointed out, she thought that it was, you know, it was murder.
Yeah.
She was completely convinced.
The older woman in this story, the one who claims to be a witch, got a lot to answer for, right?
Nobody knows who she is.
So they've never been able to trace her.
No, it's his. It was his story.
Yeah.
But nobody saw her. Nobody remembers who she is. Nobody has come forward. It's extraordinary.
That kind of adds to the mystique in a way, doesn't it?
It does. I was looking for other cases of people who were being scared to death, and I found a brilliant paper by Dr. David Clark from Sheffield Hallam University. Okay. And he's done some investigation. He looked at newspapers between 1814 and 1897 and went through all the causes of death in the obituary section.
Wow, that's a project.
Yeah. And there are 12 people who were officially given the cause of death as frightened to death. Out of those, there are 5 cases of fright attributed to a ghost or supernatural causes. One good example, and you know how we always joke about in the Victorian times, people who just see a ghost and then immediately just fall over and die.
Yeah, that happened.
In 1841, an inquest was held in Bristol on the body of an aged labourer, Patrick Hayes. I don't think I would want to be known as an aged anything. It's a bit rude, isn't it?
Well, back then, I'm really curious to know what age
24.
means. Yeah.
He had died after falling down the stairs at his lodgings at the Fortune of War, which is a pub on Marsh Street in Bristol. Mary Crocker, the wife of the landlord, testified that sometime after midnight she heard the deceased falling down the stairs from the second to the first floor of the building. When she called... This is brilliant. Only in Victorian times. When she called out to ask who it was, he replied, It's me. I am dead. Questioned on oath, Mrs. Crocker told the coroner, I rather think he saw the ghost which infects the house. It is the ghost of a lady in silk and has been troublesome to some former lodgers. 2 or 3 lodgers have been killed in the same house by the same manner, no doubt frightened from the same cause. I have never seen the ghost myself. The coroner did not refer to Mrs. Crocker's unusual suggestion in his summing up and recorded a verdict of accidental death. It's me, and I am dead. She hasn't spotted the hole in her story here.
Go on.
Well, the fact that he's saying he's dead.
He's saying he's dead. Yeah. Oh no, I thought you meant that was his ghost coming out, but no.
Oh no! Wish it was. Then there's another good one here. 7-year-old Lancashire girl Jane Halsall, who died in December 1887. The girl told her father that the children with whom she had played had teased her with the story of the Liverpool ghost Spring-Heeled Jack and the fact that he was coming to Southport. She repeated the statement to her mother, who tried to allay the child's fears by telling her the ghost was dead and buried. During the night, Jane became seriously ill, and when a doctor was called, he found her unconscious. At the subsequent inquest of the coroner, Sam Brighouse, he heard how 6 hours before her death, she was heard to say, the ghost is coming. He remarked that whoever personated this ghost, Spring-Heeled Jack, it was a mean and despicable fellow, and it was a monstrous thing that a man should have the power to strike terror into children and timid people this way. He added that he hoped the prankster would be caught and severely punished if the law could reach him.
So that's definitely a prankster rather than her imagination, is that what they're saying?
Well, so basically, the cause of death was a unanimous verdict of death from fright,
right.
But she had been told that Spring-Heeled Jack was coming to get her, basically.
Right.
So this is very similar to the Christopher Case story.
Yeah.
She was convinced that Spring-Heeled Jack was basically going to come and blow flames in her face.
But, that's basically overnight, but with a 7-year-old?
Yeah, with a 7-year-old. Yeah. And it's like the fact that a 7-year-old can do that to themselves, it strikes me again that can't be the whole story, can it?
Something else has got to be going on.
Something else, but her mother, the ghost is dead and buried. Just go to sleep.
Yeah.
It's not a great comeback, is it?
No.
I think if your kids said that to you, you'd probably just go, we'll sleep in my room for a couple of nights.
Yeah. There's that great Peter Kay ad, wasn't there? Beer ad. Do you remember that one? Where they're out for an Indian meal, and his daughter phones. She says, "Oh, it's my daughter. Oh, she's scared that there's something under the bed." And he goes, "Oh, you don't have to worry about what's under the bed. It's the monster in the wardrobe you want to worry about."
That is a good gag.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we can come to a firm conclusion about what happened with Chris, but there are some, as I pointed out, there's some examples there of people being frightened to death. So everyone who was attached to that case sort of has said similar things, that they think that he was probably
freaked himself out.
Freaked himself out.
Yeah.
But it was 33 years ago, and those people are becoming fewer and far between now. Yeah. And Sammy hasn't spoken about this for some time. I think she was last interviewed in 2006 about this. But there's only so many times you want to go over something so painful, of course. But it is the closest we've got to something that is truly perhaps mysterious and points to a death that is paranormal, apart from the case of the Bell Witch. And we will do that at a different time. But the case of the Bell Witch is probably the most famous case where it was recorded in court that there was definite paranormal involved in the death of that individual. That was the judge's conclusion. No judge said that about this. This has always been accidental death,
right,
caused by perhaps mental delusions, is like the subtext to it.
There's another bit to this. I keep thinking about the guy who owns the occult store. It kind of shows that if you are in that position, spending a fortune on things to ward off evil from an occult store is probably not worth it.
Well, yeah, that is the other thing about that. But was he feeding his own obsession?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
With that?
Yeah.
And
because you think about it, like the way you described the scene when the police kind of came in, with the salt across the door and books everywhere and candles. You get to that point, like you said, feeding his obsession. He's literally living in it 24/7, isn't he?
He is. And because he's such a loner, he is excluding other people from getting involved in that story that might dissuade him from the fact that this isn't actually happening, this isn't real. But if he's having those night terrors, he's a loner, he's being told that he's going to die by somebody that he believes in a setting which sets his mind in that direction, it feels like everything was just aligning to make him sort of believe that and to be that self-fulfilling prophecy. A little bit like those people who get, the voodoo curse. If you believe it, it might happen to you. And we sort of talk about this now. I think people talk about it as manifesting, don't they? There are people who use that word in a positive way. You can manifest things into the universe. And that is normally associated with wealth. You can manifest a Mercedes if you want to, that sort of thing. But we do know that health-wise, there is placebos and nocebos. We talked in a show, I think I was covering it, about the guy who felt like he was cured from cancer even though he was on the... Oh, no, that's right. He was being given an experimental drug,
that's right,
which worked. And then when he read a newspaper article that said it didn't work, it stopped working and the cancer came back. And then when the doctor said, no, that's a different sort of drug, this is a different one, it worked again. And so there's no reason why, if that can happen on something as sort of seemingly to our Western mind disconnected from the brain as cancer, then it could happen here with this, where... it's much more associated sort of directly with his own brain and beliefs.
I wonder, though, in those cases, whether that there is some underlying condition which has not been spotted, do you know what I mean, in terms of the autopsy or even by doctors, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, a simple one, say, with people scaring themselves to death, they just give themselves a heart attack. But I know he didn't, but... You know what I mean? That maybe it did kind of... He's not eating, he's not sleeping, he's not looking after himself, That, mind and body definitely connected.
Yeah. And then, there are other things, like people talked about sudden adult death syndrome, which would have been related to some sort of abnormal heart rhythm. Yeah. But he experienced none of those things.
Yeah.
So every which way you look, it's definitely... a Sherlock Holmesian style case, and even to this day, like we're still speculating about it, and it's very like
sad.
I'd love to know
who
that woman was. It's possible she didn't even exist. It is possible she didn't exist.
That he'd kind of he'd almost got into this hallucinatory state with it, because
the way he describes it, that she's sort of coming onto him every night.
Yeah.
And he sort of says this over dinner. There are other people present. Nobody can remember her.
Okay.
So it does make you wonder.
It does add to the mystery either way you look at it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Very much so, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so curses.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think it's a great topic for us because it straddles that, paranormal... potentially the power of the mind, everyone knows I'm quite obsessed with mass hysteria, and yet the power of all those things together, it's a weird combination.
Well, this could be the opposite of mass hysteria. This is personal hysteria. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just be careful who you listen to out there, and if you go to an ancient music conference, don't be hit on by a witch.
And if you go to an occult store to buy things to ward it off and it doesn't work, keep the receipt.
I keep thinking of who was it in Ghostbusters who owns the supernatural store? After it closes, it's Dan Aykroyd's character, isn't it?
Yeah. I tell you what, though, it's making me think. When we did Sheps and Mallet, and Nikki did the sage thing and did some, no spirits are going to follow us home. I don't know about you. It's like I was like, I don't think I believe in this, but I was relieved that she did it.
Yeah, I was relieved she did it too.
And it's like logically that makes no sense because my logical brain says whether she'd done it or not wouldn't have made any difference. But I'm glad she did it. Yeah. So it is powerful.
If you don't do it, well, it's that thing of if you don't believe it and it's true, then you've damaged yourself. But even if you don't believe it, and if you do believe, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I think what it's making me think in this case is, in a way, his belief in it was his downfall. That's the paradox of this.
Absolutely, it was. Yeah.
Fascinating, amazing story.
It is.
You can see the movie, can't you? Yeah.
Well, I wanted to dramatise it, but various reasons. But we could dramatise it in our own heads. And he didn't live to see the downfall of lift music, so that's the only positive for him.
I wonder if his last playlist was like Sympathy for the Devil and Number of the Beast, Spark at the Moon. He'd gone all kind of real dark and satanic for the last lift. There's somebody in a lift now going, this is a bit spooky.
Yeah. No, I mean...
Tubular Bells is like, going away.
God. Would it have just been easier for him to sleep with the witch?
By the sound... Well, no, she may have wanted more.
They always want more, the witches.
The witches.
That's not true. We have witches listening to us, I'm sorry. This is a caricature of a witch. Yes. Right, well, it is nearly Christmas upon us. That wasn't very seasonal, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Well, we are, I said I'd mention what we're going to do next week. We put something out on social media as well with this, so many of you may know already. We, next week, are going to... Yeah, it's this time of year where you have lists and kind of all kinds of stuff going on, best ofs. We thought we'd do something different and try and put together a list of the top 10 most important people in paranormal history.
That's a great idea.
Which is going to be interesting, I'm sure controversial, as all these lists are. Like I said, our Patreons and people on social media have been putting forward suggestions of people. Me and Ben have worked on a list. We have a really long list in front of us, and I'm saying this because on the Patreon Extra Scoop now, we are going to record ourselves doing our own production meeting and trying to whittle down our long list into a list of 10. So if you're interested in hearing us debate, argue, get frustrated with each other, go to patreon.com/TQM pod.
Thank you. That also makes a great Christmas present. You could give the gift of us.
Yeah, the gift of us. I like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
For less than a coffee a month. Lovely job. Thank you very much. We will see you next week. Stay safe. As we're recording this, the wind is howling around us.
Yes.
So my message of stay safe is obviously retrospective, but I hope it all worked out for you in the storm and your Christmas shopping is going well.
Yes, it's good weather for knocking a Dementor, of course.
Yes, it is, yes. Ho, ho, ho. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?